We all know the cruel reality of this world. In order to survive, you need money, and to get money, you must have job. And like anything in this world, there are good jobs and bad jobs, and I've had a decent mixture of both. These days, I've somehow managed to fool the IRS into thinking that drawing a webcomic, being an anime girl on the internet, and making YouTube videos is considered a job, but it wasn't always like that. Before I made art my full-time gig, I worked a bunch of different jobs. I've never worked retail, unless you count vending at artist alleys, which I don't really think is the same. And I've already made a video about my brief yet horrible stint with food service, as well as my job as an English teacher in Japan. But I still have several other jobs I've never really told you guys about, and some of them had some pretty weird things happen while I was there. Including one time I watched a dude jump down an elevator shaft, and another time when I got to watch a building burn down, so let's discuss. But before we get into it, let's do our usual, hey Star, what you drawing? The art you're watching me draw in the background is the art for my new Baldur's Gate 3 stickers and acrylic standees. Like a lot of folks on the internet, I fell really hard for this game when I started playing it a few months ago, and was inspired to draw these little cuties in the aftermath. You can grab this art on my store, TheStarfishface.com, link is down in the description. Now that that's out of the way, let's discuss the journey of my various jobs. I worked a handful of odd jobs in my high school years for some extra pocket change. Things like babysitting for a kid who lived down the street, and a brief stint making 3D SketchUp models for my dad's architecture firm. And that was actually the first and only job I've ever been fired from. I was taking some summer classes for college credit at the time, and about halfway through my grades tanked, so my dad basically said, "You're fired, go get your grades up." After that, I had more time to study for my government and economics class, but my grades did not improve. Turns out, I'm just not good at government and economics. And yet now I run a business. Ooh, the irony. My first summer after high school is when I got my first real job, working as a gopher at a hair salon. My family has gone to the same hair salon for basically my entire life, and the woman who runs it ran the entire place by herself. It had worked out well for her, but she worked long hours and only got one day off every week, so she needed an assistant, which is where I came in. While she was doing people's hair and nails, my job was doing everything else. Cleaning the towels and hairbrushes, sanitizing the nail tools, organizing dye boxes, sweeping hair off the floor, occasionally doing her grocery shopping, and basically constantly dusting because the place got dusty fast. I wasn't paid a lot. I basically made minimum wage and only worked about 20 hours per week, but money was money, and it was a fairly easy job where I could pop my headphones in and listen to music all day while sweeping. The worst thing that happened at that job sounds like a doofy joke taken out of an old cartoon. Every day when I came in for work, the first thing I did was grab the laundry bin filled with dirty hair towels and stick them in the washing machine. All the towels in the shop were white, so I didn't have to worry about separating them or anything. I just dumped the whole bin into the washer and set it to go. And 99.99% of the time this worked out perfectly fine, except for the one time it didn't. On that fateful day, somehow, someway, a mystery dark red towel got thrown into the laundry bin with all the other white towels, and I didn't see it when I went to go run the laundry. But when I opened the laundry machine after the wash cycle was finished, I was suddenly faced with pink. The entire washer was pink. And I don't mean a soft pink, like a baby pink or a rosy pink caused by just a little excess dye coming off that one red towel. No, all of the white towels in that load of laundry had suddenly turned bright neon pink. I was horrified. This was the biggest mistake I had made during my entire time working there, and as I sat in the back room staring at the damp, flamboyant mistakes sitting in the washer, I imagined how angry my boss would be and got so freaked out I almost started crying right then and there. I knew I wouldn't be able to hide what had happened, so I decided to just rip the band-aid off and go tell her right away. I took a deep breath and waddled out into the front room, starting the conversation by apologizing profusely, explaining what had happened, and producing one of the newly pinked towels so she could gaze upon my shame. I waited for her to chew me out, to get angry with me for making such a stupid mistake and firing me on the spot. But instead, she just started laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. She told me it was fine and to just make sure to separate the towels more carefully from now on. And for the rest of the time I worked there, she just had a handful of towels that were weirdly pink. The pink towels eventually faded to a lighter pink after being washed dozens of times, but every time I saw them, I winced a little, being constantly reminded that, yeah, I did that. I ruined those towels. But at least I didn't get fired over it. Working that job was fairly mundane most of the time, but the most exciting parts were the rare instances when she'd send me out on errands. I enjoyed getting to drive around and get out of the shop for a little bit, and my boss even reimbursed me for gas, which was nice. But one errand in particular stands out as the weirdest thing she ever sent me out for. At one point, I picked up the job again during winter break, and she told me she wanted to make some little Christmassy gift bags for her customers. She already knew what she wanted to put in them. She had found these little bottles of peppermint lotion in the dollar section of Target, and she had already bought a few, but they didn't have enough at the Target she had already been to. So she asked me to go to some of the other Target stores in town and pick up a few more. It sounded simple enough, so I asked her how many she needed. And she casually said, "Oh, not that many, just about 200. Oh, that's many. Despite feeling a little intimidated by the task, I still reveled in the idea of going on a scavenger hunt for most of my work shift. I ended up having to go to 5 or 6 Target stores and raiding their dollar sections for lotion bottles, but eventually I had gathered enough that I could bring them back to the shop. A victorious haul! My boss praised me for my hard work, and I even got to go home a little early. And then, a few weeks later, she approached me again. By this point, Christmas had passed, and she asked if I could return the leftover lotion bottles. I said sure and asked how many she had left. She then pulled out 2 full grocery bags of the little lotion bottles I had just spent an entire shift hunting all over town for and said, "This many." It's probably close to half of the 200 bottles I had bought just a few weeks before. I guess maybe she overestimated how many she needed? Feeling a little overwhelmed, but not wanting to disappoint my boss, I gathered up all the bottles, anxiously drove over to the nearest Target, waddled up to the returns counter, plopped both bags filled to the brim with tiny $1 lotion bottles on the counter, looked the cashier dead in the eyes, and whispered, "I am so sorry." It took almost 20 minutes to count out everything and process the return. I never went back to that Target again. I couldn't live with the shame. I did like my hair salon job. Most of the time it was pretty easy and my boss was nice to me. The hardest part most days was keeping myself busy for my entire 4-hour shift. The shop was pretty small and I often just ran out of things to do, and then I'd have to figure out some kind of way to keep busy so I wasn't wasting my boss's money. However, in contrast, the job I had after that, I was basically paid to sit still and look cute all day. Enter the receptionist job. The summer after my freshman year of college, a family friend and neighbor contacted me saying they were looking for a receptionist at the law firm she worked at. It was a part-time position and the job was fairly simple. I'd need to sit at the front desk and greet clients, put out drinks and clean the conference room whenever they had meetings, keep the copiers and printers stocked with paper, and since I was good with computers, I'd occasionally get asked to help recreate legal document templates if the firm didn't have files for them. But 99% of the time, my job was to sit at the front desk and look cute. And during an entire shift, we'd usually get 1, maybe 2 people coming in. Suffice to say, the job was pretty easy. Occasionally, the lawyers would send me out on errands, usually dropping documents off at the courthouse down the street or mailing things out at the post office. Nothing terribly interesting, but running those errands did mean I got to pop in my music and go on little walks, which I always enjoyed. I did a lot of brainstorming for early drafts of Cast Off walking around downtown Austin on my way to and from the courthouse, which was nice. As you can probably expect, not a ton of interesting things happened at that job, but there was one story that still haunts me to this day. The office was in one of the big high-rises in downtown Austin, and getting up to our floor involved taking multiple elevators. Our office had 2 elevator doors right across from my desk, so whenever anyone came up to our floor, I'd be there to greet them immediately. We didn't get people coming up often, usually just clients or food deliveries, but one time we had a maintenance guy come up. He walked into the office waiting room, I said hello to him, but without even acknowledging me, he turned around and walked to the other elevator, stuck a key in the little keyhole at the top of the door. Yeah, you know those holes at the top of the elevator doors? Those are keyholes. I never knew that, but I found that out that day, and now you know about it too. And he just forced the door open with his bare hands. But there wasn't an elevator on the floor currently, so when he opened the door, all I could see was just the inside of the terrifying elevator shaft with all the cables swaying in the center. And I'm just sitting there, confused and a little terrified, when, without warning, the dude just jumps into the elevator shaft. So casually, just stepped off the edge and disappeared. And then the doors just closed behind him. And I never saw that guy again. Now, logic would tell you that, oh, the elevator was probably just below him and he jumped down onto it, but it was a far enough drop that it looked scary. But personally, I like to think I witnessed a rare elevator cryptid that day. Can't believe I didn't get a photo. Missed opportunity. During my college years, I went back and forth between the hair salon and the law firm jobs every time I came home for vacation, depending on which place needed me more and fit better within my schedule. I even worked a very brief stint at the law firm again right after I came home from Japan, but they just needed me to fill in for a few weeks while they looked for someone they could keep on permanently. On what would end up being my last day, my neighbor who had gotten me the job walked up and said, "So, hey, we found someone we like for the receptionist position." To which I replied, "Okay, is this the part where I get fired?" And she said, "Yup." And I said, "Okay, cool," and went home. So I guess that means I've technically been fired twice? I don't know, that last one barely feels like it counts. I was just doing them a favor and knew I wouldn't be there that long. After college, I finally had to find my first full-time job, and I've already made a few videos talking about the awful food service job I had, as well as the dumb internship I wasted a few months on. Links for those videos are in the description. But after several months of applying to just about everything I was qualified for, I finally landed something. An artist and illustrator position for an educational company. Now, I won't say the name of the place I worked for my own privacy, if nothing else, but I will say that if you went to public school in the US, you've probably heard of these guys. And the specific department I worked for was their standardized testing and development branch. Basically, if you live in America, depending on what grade you're in, you'll have to take a series of standardized tests at the end of every school year, and each state has their own tests. The basic way I can describe this job is that if you were a student taking your end of the year statewide test and you saw a picture of a gerbil in the test booklet, I drew that gerbil. Now, I didn't get to draw gerbils or other fun stuff often. Most of the work I was doing was drawing things like graphs and charts and timelines, and other really boring graphics for stuff like math and science tests. But occasionally, we'd get to draw a gerbil. Those were the fun days. The job was kind of boring most of the time, but my coworkers were all really nice, and it paid well enough that I was finally able to move out of my parents' house. But here's a fun fact. I lied on my resume to get that job. Oops, they can't fire me now. I left years ago. Ha 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 ha. Okay, so here's what happened. In the job listing, the company said they were looking for people with knowledge of the full Adobe suite, but especially Adobe Illustrator. I had used Illustrator before on one or two projects during art school, but wasn't like an expert or anything. Illustrator is mostly used for vector and graphics work, and I was not a graphic designer by any stretch of the imagination. But I had taught myself to use Photoshop when I was a kid, and from my experience, most Adobe software had pretty similar interfaces. And I figured that anything I didn't know, I could look up a YouTube tutorial for. So I marked down in the application that I was proficient in Illustrator, lied through my teeth in the interview, got the job, and spent the night before my first day brushing up on the basics of Illustrator. I stumbled a little my first few days as I tried to get used to the program, but ultimately I was able to figure out all the functions I needed to do my job properly very quickly, so everything worked out okay in the end. Yay! I regret nothing! Moral of the story, lie on your resume! Do not actually lie on your resume. Most of the time the work I was doing for this job was pretty simple and understimulating, but personally, I was fine with that. It didn't use up a lot of my creative energy, which meant I got to go home and throw myself into the hobbies after work. In fact, I actually started Cast Off while I was working at this job. The comic uploads on Mondays and Fridays because those were the days I worked from home. That way, if anything went wrong with the comic upload on those days, I could really easily jump on my home computer to fix it. And I kept the upload schedule after I left the company because, well, I had gotten used to it by that point and didn't see a need to change it. Anyway, when I first started the company, most of our workload was doing illustrations and graphics, static images. But after a little while, they started pulling in some new contracts that called for animation work. And that was exciting to me, considering it was the thing I actually went to school for. Similar to the other work we were doing, it likely wouldn't be anything exciting, but it did mean we got to play around with After Effects, which was when I started to finally have some fun. When we first started bringing in animation projects, our boss assigned everyone some simple on-the-job homework to teach us how After Effects worked and get everyone used to using the program. The training project was really simple. Have two gears that spin and have a ball sitting in the grooves of one gear, get passed to the second gear, and then fall off the gears and roll onto the floor. While everyone else spent several days on this project, I finished it in 10 minutes, 20 tops. I had used the program a lot in school and was already familiar with it, and most of my coworkers were on the older side and weren't as good with new tech. But because I finished the assignment so early and we had been given several days to work on the training project, I got a little bored. When I get bored, I tend to get quirky. At the end of the week, myself and all my coworkers hopped on a conference call to take turns showing off our little gear animations. We watched everyone's animations, folks talked about the things they learned, and everyone else offered tips on how to improve certain things for future project. Group learning stuff, you know. And then it was my turn. I watched as my boss pulled up my video and streamed it to the rest of my coworkers. It started normally, 2 gears spinning on a wall and a little red ball getting passed from gear to gear. But at the end of the animation, when the ball fell off the gears and onto the floor, it hit the ground and exploded. I had downloaded some video footage of explosion, smoke, and fire, composited them all into the animation, added a camera shake when the explosion went off, and even had the gears get knocked off the wall by the force, hit the ground, and roll off screen. Not expecting a sudden twist ending with photorealistic explosions, my coworkers got a good laugh and asked me how I'd pulled the effects off. I told them that this was what happened when I got bored, and then raked in the satisfaction that I had gotten a giggle out of my whole department. Once I had shown my After Effects proficiency to the entire team, I ended up getting most of the complicated animation work assigned to me. I was fine with it. It was a lot more fun than drawing graphs all day, and eventually I even got the sort of official job title of lead animator. Because I was basically the only animator. But whatever, I'll take it. It didn't come with a pay raise or anything, but I did put it as my job title on my resume when I started looking for new jobs. Because, unfortunately, this job wasn't going to last. I already told this story a bit in my first JET program video, but only 1 year into the 2-year contract I had signed with this job, the bigwigs in corporate decided they wanted to downsize. And since I was on a temporary contract instead of a permanent position, I was among the many on the chopping block. I was especially upset when this news came down the pipeline because I had just signed a year lease on my first solo apartment and was very suddenly going to be jobless in just a few weeks. However, considering my good performance, my boss really wanted to keep me on as long as possible. And by sheer coincidence, one of my coworkers was pregnant at the time and would soon be taking a few months of maternity leave. Just before I was let go, my boss was able to convince corporate to keep me on until my coworker came back from her maternity leave, managing to extend my job by a few more months. Then, when that time was coming to a close, another of my coworker was planning on taking maternity leave soon, and my boss was able to pull some strings and get my position extended again. Because of my boss's persistence and a perfectly timed string of pregnancies, I was able to stay on at that job for a year and a half after they had originally planned on letting me go. Which, as stressful as it was very good, considering I hadn't had any luck finding anything else. Now, as hilarious as the only thing keeping me employed as a well-timed string of pregnancies is as a story, it's not the best one I have. That honor is reserved for a little thing that happened the first winter I worked there. I've always been a pretty fast worker, especially in regards to art stuff, and some advice I got in the first week of starting this job was, slow down and don't finish your projects so quickly or else the entire team will be expected to work just as fast as you do. Taking this advice, I'd usually take a work ticket, finish it at my usual speed, and then spend some time taking a walk. The office I worked in was in a fairly big complex, and taking a lap around the full thing would take 15 to 20 minutes. And I was usually taking several walks per day between work tickets. Normally, I'd just idle my thoughts away and think about comic scripts on my walk, then head back to my desk and keep working. One fateful day in December, something weird happened. It was pretty early in the morning. I had just finished a smaller work ticket and was taking my first walk of the day. And as I walked around the building, looking out over the parking lot, I saw something that I hadn't ever seen before. From a distance, it looked like a big plywood box sitting out in the middle of the parking lot. Intrigued, I kept my eye on it as I continued my walk. It was in a sparsely populated part of the parking lot and there weren't any cars around it. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a plywood box, it was an entire room. It was probably an 8-foot cube with a floor, ceiling, and 3 walls made of standard plywood, but one wall was missing, and visible inside was a decorated and furnished little room. There was a plush armchair, the walls were painted, there was a carpet on the floor and paintings on the walls, and a large Christmas tree was taking up about half the space. I looked around but didn't see anyone standing near it. It was just a room, a weird little room in the middle of an office building parking lot with no one else around. Not knowing what to think, I finished my walk as normal and headed back to my office. Once I got inside, I sat with a handful of coworkers who were there that day and told them, "Hey, I have no idea why, but there's a room just sitting out in the parking lot today. Anybody know what that's about?" My coworkers didn't know either, but seemed intrigued, and throughout the morning, as they went to take walks of their own, they'd return and say, "Hey, yeah, I saw that weird room in the parking lot. What the heck is that about?" And we'd all just shrug at each other. Apparently, word about the little room started to spread to the whole office, and I heard some people from other departments talking about it all through the morning. It seemed like no one in our office knew what the deal was with the weird little room in the parking lot. That was, until later that afternoon, one of my coworkers returned from the break room and proudly proclaimed, "I know what the room is for." The rest of us gathered around as she told us her findings. Apparently, one of the other companies in the building was getting a fire safety demonstration from the local fire department, and since word had gotten out, we were all invited to watch later that day when they took the little room and burned the whole thing to the ground. Later that afternoon, the denizens of our office complex slowly began to gather around the mysterious room at the center of the parking lot. A few fire trucks had also gathered in the area, and several geared-up firefighters were milling about waiting for the event to start. At 2 p.m. on the dot, one of the firemen stepped forward, announcing that it was time for the demonstration to begin. See, the purpose of this demonstration was fairly simple. In the few weeks before Christmas, the fire department wanted to make sure people understood the dangers of bringing a dead tree into their home during the holidays. Christmas trees are pretty, you see, and a fairly standard tradition in many households. However, they are also extremely flammable, and if you aren't careful, Christmas trees can be the kindling that can start a fire that burns your whole house down, which is not ideal. To demonstrate this, the firemen lit a single match and tossed it into a trash can at the base of the Christmas tree, and within a few moments, the entire room was ablaze. So, here's the thing, gang. Some people have accused me of faking my Storytime videos in the past. I've gotten comments saying that my stories are too weird to be real. Some even accusing me of making things up so I'd have something to talk about, or telling lies so you guys would be more interested in my stories. A lot of this, I imagine, stems from me not always having photo or video evidence of these things occurring, which I suppose I can understand. So some of you might even be thinking right now, "Dang, Star, this story sounds super fake." Well, joke's on you, viewer, because this story happens late enough in my life that I have the footage still. I had to dig through the archives of my old personal Instagram page, but behold, the flaming workplace Christmas sacrifice! It was real all along! They let the fire burn until it got big enough that the firefighters were satisfied they had gotten the message across, then put the whole thing out with some fire extinguishers, and we were allowed to come examine the damage. The tree was almost completely gone, except for the charred husk of the trunk, and everything else was burned beyond saving. And as the fire department packed up the remains of the holiday sacrifice, we all made our way back to the office to finish our work. What a day. I worked at that office job for just under 3 years total. I finally ended up leaving on my own terms once I got accepted into the JET program and moved to Japan to be an English teacher. I was there for a few years, and when I moved back, I started my art business, and I've been working for myself ever since. Being self-employed is hard, and there's a lot of baggage that comes with it. I'm entirely dependent on my own efforts to make sure I can afford all my expenses, and doing taxes is an absolute nightmare. But as stressful as it is, I really enjoy working for myself. I decide my own hours. If I get tired in the middle of the day, I can go take a power nap and nobody yells at me, and I don't have to suffer at the whims of a boss telling me what to do. It does unfortunately mean that I don't get to be surprised with random fire safety demonstrations during my workday, but I suppose it's worth the trade-off. And that about does it for this one. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. It was fun trying to scratch my memory of the weird experiences I had at my many jobs throughout the year, so thanks for listening to my rambles. Like I said at the start, the art in the video is the art I used for my new Baldur's Gate 3 stickers and acrylic standees. You can snag these for yourself in my shop, link is down in the description. Lastly, thanks to all of my awesome patrons for supporting my works, and thanks especially to the patrons at my new video shoutout tiers, Holly and Firedrake McPhee. Your support is so appreciated, and thanks for helping to keep me from having to go back to my office job. Alright, that's it from me. Take care, folks, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye!